Well, good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you all. Can you all hear me? Can I get a thumbs up or a Vulcan salute if anyone's keen on that? Lovely. It's lovely to see. Oh, good. I see some good Vulcan salutes there. Um, I really look forward to the day when we can all meet together in person, and hopefully, given the way that things are going, that shouldn't be too much longer. Um, when you do meet me in person, you may not recognize me because you're only used to seeing me on a kind of 2 inches of a screen. I am actually 6'3", just in case you were wondering when you get to see me. So today we're going to look at this first chunk of the letter to the Christians in Rome. But before we start, we need to look a bit at the background and the history so that we can better understand why this letter was written, who it was written to, and what it might be telling us today. So most people would say that the letter was written in around 57 AD, which is around 25 years after the death of Jesus and around 50 years after Tim was born. Tim, you might remember those days very well. Now, when Paul when Paul was writing, Rome was the center of the universe at that point. The phrase is true, all roads lead to Rome. It really was. It was the beacon, the outposts of civilization, this unstoppable military force. And due to Rome's importance, its strategic, political, spiritual, economic, Paul was desperate to get to Rome to share his faith there. But as the passage said, different things had happened that had prevented him. The Roman emperor at the time was a guy called Nero. Now, Emperor Nero was in no way related to the tasty Cafe Nero, which some of you may have been in to visit, and you may enjoy a bagel or a patisserie. But Emperor Nero rather, became emperor when he was around 16, and his mother Agrippina tried to boss him around and tell him what to do. Now, some of you might say, well, that was just her being a typical mother and doing what mothers do best by telling her son what to do. But then, as with most Roman emperors, he got very bored and irritated by his mother, so had her killed in typical Roman fashion. Nero also presided over the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, and many people believe that he blamed the Christians for this fire and used the fire as a way to justify persecuting Christians and turning the attention away from himself, who most likely caused the fire, and blamed the Christians as a scapegoat. So why is it important to know all this? Well, by the time Paul was able to get to Rome, he was under house arrest, and both he and Peter were put to death on the back of the persecution of Emperor Nero. So it's important that we understand who this guy is, because under his watch, Paul and Peter were put to death. One of the things that we need to remember when we're looking at this church in Rome that was set up is that Christianity, when it first began, had exploded out of Jerusalem. And in such a short space of time, churches and fellowships had sprung up all over the Middle East, into Africa, Asia, Europe. It had just gone absolutely everywhere. And many of the churches that had been founded by the original apostles, they were able to found them, give them some guidance, teaching, boundaries. But there were some churches that were set up that had just been set up by people who were touched by the Spirit or who had encountered the gospel in some way. So they didn't have the same knowledge or the same understanding as the apostles or the disciples even. The church in Rome was just such a church. And so when Paul was writing to this newly formed church, his primary aim in this letter was to give them a basic understanding of the gospel and salvation. This letter to the Romans is like Christianity 101. It's jam-packed, full of theology, of teaching, of the essence. If you put the gospel into a cooker and kind of boiled it down to get rid of all the other stuff, you'd be left with the book of Romans. It's that kind of real nuggets, real kind of jam-packed, as I say, full of theology. And Paul's basic premise is summed up in verse 16. Wonderful verse. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. So as I say, today we're going to focus on this first half of the first chapter. So I would encourage you to take a sip of tea to prepare yourself, strap yourself in, because we're going to have some fun. There are 3 points that I want to draw out today as we begin to explore this first part of the chapter. The gospel is for the world. The gospel is for each other. The gospel is for us. So firstly, the gospel is for the world. Verse 8 says, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world." This was a little church that was founded by those who had been touched by the Spirit. It hadn't been founded by the greats and the pillars of the faith, by the greatly educated or the most important people in the faith. It was founded by normal, everyday folk who just wanted to share their love of Jesus. And Paul praises them for that, for their everyday, simple love and faith. And he encourages them that because they practice everyday love, he says, your faith is being reported all over the world. This little church with normal people was being talked about because they were faithful people. How wonderful is that? It didn't matter about the quality of the preaching, the success of the technology, whether it worked or not, the selection of cakes after the church service. People talked about this church because they were faithful people. I think there's something really important in that for us and for you at these difficult times. We can't meet together and do the same things that we would normally do, but we can still demonstrate to the world and to ourselves and to each other that we are faithful people. People who faithfully love, forgive, and bless, even though we can't get to do it physically together. Faith hasn't been locked down like we have. And it is this faithfulness to continue to meet and to pray that has attracted the attention of others. In a recent study, it was found that a quarter of adults now engage with online religious services. A quarter of adults engage. That's far more than there's ever been. The Church of England set up a prayer hotline after the COVID crisis, and within the first 48 hours, they had 6,000 phone calls for prayer. Is that not wonderful? Within 2 days of setting it up, 6,000 folk called up for prayer. And there's even more. A third of young adults between 18 to 34 now engage with online religious services. A third of 18 to 34-year-olds. Remarkable stuff. All of these numbers are more than has ever been before lockdown. So what Paul said to the Romans, he could easily say to our fellowships today. I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. So as we begin to move out of lockdown, the challenge and indeed the danger is that we need to capitalize on this momentum to create something new rather than simply returning to the old way we used to do things. Being faithful is not about sticking to the way we used to do things. Being truly faithful is about stepping out in obedience and riding the wave of the Spirit. Secondly, the gospel is for each other. In verse 12, Paul says, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Now remember Nasty Nero, the one that charges you too much for your coffee. Well, when Nero was in charge, things really weren't that easy for Christian people. There was lots of persecution around, there was lots of hostility from the Jewish authorities, there was lots of causes not to be encouraged. And by this time, poor Paul, if we think of him for a moment, Paul had been beaten and whipped, he'd been shipwrecked, people had tried to kill him, he's been imprisoned, all more times than you can shake a stick at. He's not really had a good time of it at all. And so for Paul, there was lots of things not to be encouraged about, because everywhere he went, people wanted to kill him. That's really not very nice to have that sense of hatred against you. But Paul told these Christians in Rome, the Roman Christians, that they were so faithful that everyone was talking about them. And because of that, they were a source of great encouragement to him. One of the things that I enjoy doing is marathon running. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of running 26.2 miles. There's something wonderful about just going out, leaving everything behind. A few years ago, I was doing the Loch Ness Marathon, and I ran it in the best time, in my best time ever, probably because the Loch Ness monster was chasing me for most of the time, I should say. But as I approached the last part of the race, I was beginning to get tired and I wasn't feeling so good, and I knew I still had miles to go. And as we were running into the kind of final bit, which ended in Inverness city itself, all of a sudden there started to be little pockets of people lined up beside the street. And they were all cheering and shouting encouragement for the runners. And the crowd started shouting, "Come on, Philip, you can do it. Come on, Philip, you're almost there." Having people shout your name and encourage you was exactly the boost that I needed at that time. Although I did wonder, to be honest, how they knew my name. I didn't think I was that famous. But as I was running down, I noticed that we all have a bib on with your number on it, and it's got your name on it as well. So that's how everyone knew my name. But that encouragement was exactly what I needed at exactly the time I needed it. People to say when you're down in the dumps, "Come on, Philip, we can do this together." We are called to be a people of encouragement. Hebrews 10:25 says, "Let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. Instead, let us encourage each other." So what does encouragement look like? Well, it looks like this, all these little faces on this screen, Christian people meeting together to hear each other's stories, to support each other in prayer, and to guide each other in love. It doesn't need to be the big things. In some ways, it's the little acts of encouragement are more powerful. Send a text after the service, send a letter, send a card, a gift. Why not tell people? Knock on your neighbour's door and say, "Thanks for all you do. It's really appreciated. We couldn't do this without you. You're a key part of the team." Or maybe say to some individual, "You're the best preacher I've ever heard. You're just amazing." I'm just saying. Let us encourage each other. So lastly, the gospel is for ourselves. That wonderful verse 16, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes." The gospel is the power of God to bring salvation to you. Some months ago, I was engaging with a soldier on camp who had just lost his brother very suddenly. His brother had tragically been murdered. He was obviously deeply distraught, and he was stuck in a loop of feeling that he had failed his brother, that he wasn't good enough anymore, that life really wasn't worth going on. He was stuck in this loop of just feeling he just wasn't good enough because he couldn't stop this from happening. It was a sunny day, so we went for a walk around the camp just to talk about things and how he was feeling. He was in such a dark place. And as we walked, all of a sudden there was this heavy rain shower, And I thought, well, that's just great, God. Even the weather is going to make this guy feel even worse about himself. Can you not give me something? And then as we began to walk a bit further, in front of us, the most beautiful double rainbow appeared in front of us. And he stopped, and you could see, and he looked at it, and he just began to weep. And he turned to me and said, "Did you ask God to do that, Padre?" And I said, "Well, God works in mysterious ways." And his dark feelings of not being good enough vanished in the presence of God's hope, wonderfully so. I don't know where you are in your lives today, where your families and your friends are. At times, we can often find ourselves in dark places where we feel we're not good enough, where we feel we're not worthy enough, when we feel we don't matter enough. This is all from the enemy, who delights in convincing us that God's salvation and love is not for us, it's for other people who are better than us. Let me tell you today, you are enough, you are worthy, and you do matter. Paul is absolutely clear. Salvation is for everyone who believes. Forgiveness is for everyone who looks upon the cross, and eternity is for everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord. So wherever you have been, whatever you have done, and however far you have wandered, God is desperate for you to come home to him so that he can give you himself and his love. The gospel is for the world. So let the stories of our faithfulness continue to inspire the world. The gospel is for each other. So let us encourage one another with all that we have and all that we are. The gospel is for us. So let us walk out of the darkness and into his wonderful light. Amen.
Thank you again,